Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, colleagues. This is Deb Calvert, and I am the Administrative Manager in OFS. And on behalf of my fellow committee members, Sarah Brown, Susan Earle, Bruce Engelbrecht, Laura Logston, Claire Simonson, Mark Strom, and Rachel Walsh, I want to thank you for participating in the first ever OFS-sponsored City of St. Paul Jewish Heritage Month event. So I especially want to thank everyone for joining remotely and let you know that at the end of the program, there will be time for questions and answers. Please submit them by the chat function and I will read them so everyone, including our presenter, can hear them. And I also want to give a shout out to the Office of Technology and Communication, who has done a wonderful job setting up this presentation. Our MC for today is Council Member and regular mensch, Rebecca Noecker. Rebecca represents Ward 2 on the St. Paul City Council. She was elected in 2015 as the first woman to represent Ward 2 and is now starting her second term. Rebecca is a proud West Side resident, a former middle school science teacher, a wife and mom to Whitman age 7 and Fitzgerald age 5. Her priorities in office are early childhood education, economic development, safe streets, and accountable government. Rebecca biking, singing along to Broadway musicals. She also belongs to Beth Jacob congregation and, like me, is a member of the Jewish community. Councilmember Nick to introduce our event and special guest speaker.
Great. Thank you so much, Deb. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Deb and Neal, just want to make sure you can hear me okay? All right, great. So I really appreciate the opportunity to MC today. And I want to start with this story. So a Jewish grandma and her grandson are at the beach. He is playing in the water. She's standing on the shore, not wanting to get wet, when all of a sudden, a huge wave appears out of nowhere and crashes directly where the boy is waiting. The water recedes and the boy is no longer there anymore. He was swept away. The grandma holds her hands to the sky and screams, "My God, how could you? Haven't I been a wonderful grandmother? Haven't I been a wonderful mother? Haven't I kept a kosher home? Haven't I given to charity? Haven't I lit candles every Friday night? Haven't I tried my very best to live a good life? How could you do this to me?" And a voice booms from the sky, "All right already." A moment later, another huge wave appears out of nowhere and crashes on the beach. And as the water recedes, the boy is standing there. He's smiling and splashing around as if nothing ever happened. The voice booms again, "I have returned your grandson. Are you satisfied?" She responds, "He had a hat." This is one of my favorite Jewish jokes because it says so much about us. Of course, there's a lot of variation within a group of 13 million people, but generally speaking, Jews are known as the people of asking questions, of critical thinking, of pushing limits, and even of pushing God. We're the people who brought the world the term chutzpah, after all, which, for those of you who don't know, is loosely translated as gutsiness bordering on rudeness, and I think it's really a great term for everybody who works in an office to have on hand today. We're also the people of asking why things have to be this way and pushing for a better world. It's interesting that in Judaism, there is actually no word for charity. The Hebrew word that is usually translated as charity actually means justice. The idea is that we do good, not because it's nice to do, but because it's right, because it tilts the world back in the direction of justice. This is an idea that motivates me in my own work, and I know that it's at the core of so much that all of us do in our work at the city. Today's celebration of Jewish Heritage Month is part of a citywide effort to build community by learning more about each other, about our roots, and about the contributions of many groups to St. Paul, with events like Black History Month, events honoring women, Hmong heritage, etc. While the city has historically celebrated Holocaust Remembrance Day, this is actually the first year that we are celebrating Jewish Heritage Month. I'm really grateful that you took the time to be here today, and I'm also very thankful to be part of a city that so values inclusion and celebration of our diversity. Not every place that I have worked in before has been that way. In particular, I want to thank the Office of Financial Services for planning today's event. Who knew that the people who expertly set and manage our city's budget are also skilled at sourcing the best klezmer music and kosher deli food citywide? Special thanks, as Deb mentioned, to Sarah Brown, Susan Earle, Bruce Engelbrecht, Laura Logston, Claire Simonson, Mark Strom, and Rachel Walsh, and to Deb, who really led the charge to make today possible and kept me on my game all the way through. And about that deli food and klezmer music, as my people say, man plans and God laughs. Despite the planning team's best efforts, we can't cater from Cecil's or enjoy Mark Stillman's music today, but there are still plenty of ways to support both those institutions, and they were mentioned in the email inviting you to today's event. So please continue supporting both Cecil's and Mark. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce someone who's a good friend and a tremendous leader. Mayor Carter is a person who asks good questions, who cares deeply about social justice, and who has the chutzpah to push for what's right, even when it's tough. In other words, he may not have been born Jewish, but he certainly got what it takes. Mayor Carter, welcome.
This is Deb Calvert, the chair of the Jewish Heritage Month Committee, and we are still waiting for the mayor to join, so perhaps we'll just have to be flexible, and when he joins the call, we can get on. So our MC, Councilmember Noecker, if you can please introduce our guest speaker. We'll just proceed and we'll interrupt when our special guest, Mayor Carter, joins. Thank you.
Sounds good. Happy to do that. All right. So, and now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. Neal Gosman was born and raised on the East Coast before coming to Minnesota in 1970 as an anti-poverty VISTA worker. Other than a 2-year stint in the U.S. Army in Vietnam, he has lived in St. Paul ever since. He was raised in the Reform Jewish movement, and in St. Paul, he was one of 4 founding incorporators of Congregation Shir Tikva, which is a Reform synagogue. He was a founding member of Brit Tzedek V'Shalom, a national organization that is considered pro-Israel, pro-peace, and it has since merged with J Street. He has studied at YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, the Center for Jewish History, the Southern Jewish Historical Society, and elsewhere. He has taught Jewish history at Shir Tikva and Mount Zion synagogues, and occasionally dialogued in Jewish history in various venues. He was the producer of a video program commemorating the 50th anniversary of Soviet Yiddish poets who were murdered by Stalin in 1952. He's an active member of the Jewish War Veterans of the US and of the Yiddish Winkel, which promotes the continuity of the Yiddish language. He's accomplished in Jewish genealogy, and he's traced his Jewish family roots to pre-Civil War South Carolina, Ukraine, Poland, and Germany. He has personally visited documented family sites dating back as far as 1502. Neal is married to State Senator Sandy Pappas. They have 3 daughters born and raised in St. Paul who now live in Israel with their 28 grandchildren, and Neal has visited Israel over 20 times. And I saved the very best for last. As a downtown resident, Neal resides in the very great Ward 2. Welcome, Neal.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Mayor Carter, as soon as you're here. Thank you, Councilmember Noecker. Thank you, Deb Calvert, and the committee and the tech staff. Very funny thing you did, Council member, is you took one of my jokes. So, all right, I'm going to have to modify a little bit here. All right, I'm going to give you all a bit of a presentation here. It's going to be very quickly. We've got several thousand years of Jewish heritage to go through, and I'm going to do it in 30 minutes. So it's going to be a quick run through. And I'm sure there are other Jews in the call that are going to hear what I say and say, no, that's all wrong. But too bad, I've got the camera. If you want to argue or have questions, we'll do that at the end. Just send them in the chat line to Deb, please. As Councilmember Noecker said, my wife and I have 3 children we raised here in St. Paul that went to Central High School. They became very religious and moved to Israel, and they are holding all our grandchildren hostage. This picture is 3 years old, so it's missing 5 kids. Okay. All right, so your homework assignment, for those of you who got it, was to have one of these in front of you. I think everybody watching knows what this is. It is a bagel. The way you say bagel in Yiddish is bagel. A bagel is a Jewish food that was brought to the United States by immigrants in the 1880s. And up until the 1960s, the only way you could get a bagel was to go to New York and get one that was handmade by the Bagel Bakers Local 338 in New York City. Maybe if you went to Chicago or Philly, you could also get one, but it wasn't until the 60s that bagels became, somebody invented a machine where you could make bagels in a machine, package them and sell them in the grocery store. And since then, bagels have become American. And I think this is a microcosm of the Jewish experience in a way in the United States. So who is a Jew? How do you get to be a Jew? How do you know someone is a Jew? And I've got 10 ways that you can do that. And I'm just going to run through them here. Originally, Jews were the Hebrews of the Bible, the Israelites, the Judeans. And they were called Jews because they came from an area where the tribe of Judea settled in the land of Israel. And so people from that area then were called Jews from that point on. Another way of being a Jew is the Jewish religion. The Jewish religion is one that it's an evolved tradition based on historic turning points. It started one way and it became something what we see today. Jews were the first to document the notion that there was one God who was all powerful, it had no body, and was transcendent over all things. And this God created everything, and especially human beings, the most important part of God's creation. And God created human beings to know good and evil, and gave human beings the free choice to choose. God didn't say you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. God said, here they are, you choose. So God gave human beings a free choice to choose good or evil. The Bible tells a story about a flood, and there was a covenant between God and the human beings afterwards, saying he's not going to do that again. There was a second covenant that God made with the Hebrews. And from that covenant came the notion that the Hebrews or the Jews were the chosen people, because these were the folks that God made a special covenant or deal or contract with. And the basic point of that deal was this. God said, follow my laws and things will go well. If you don't, they won't. And the Jews said, why us? Isn't there a way around this? But that's it, in a nutshell. Okay, Jewish religion. All right, so now the third way of being a Jew is the Jewish people or peoples and their languages that they spoke. The origins of Jews came from the Middle East, but they scattered throughout the world, especially the ancient world. And where they went, they adapted to local ways and came up with languages, Jewish languages that reflected where they were. So in the Middle East, there were Mizrahi Jews, or Jews in Persia, which is now Iran, or Yemen. And these Jews spoke a Judeo-Arabic. There were Jews in Ethiopia, Jews in ancient Rome, where during the Roman times, Jews in Greece during the Greek times. There were Jews in Central Asia, in Bukhara, in Kazakhstan, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. There were Jews who wandered into Europe, into where France and Germany are today. They are called Ashkenazi Jews or German Jews. And the language they spoke was Yiddish. And then there was another bunch of Jews that ended up in what is now Spain. And they were called Sephardi Jews. And the language they spoke was a Judeo-Spanish called Ladino. And all these languages are still spoken somewhere today, even if the Jews don't necessarily live where they wandered to. A fourth way of being a Jew is the ritual observances and life cycle events that Jews do. and various forms of observance, more or less. And examples are, the prime example of a Jewish practice is the Sabbath, the seventh day of the week when Jews are supposed to refrain from working and stay and contemplate how the week went and how the week will go. Another indication of a Jewish ritual is what I'm wearing here, a yarmulke or a kippah or a skull cap. It's not required that it looks like this. It could look like this. It could be a ball cap. It could be anything. And when I visit my grandchildren, I don't wear this so much except when I go to the shul. I wear this because I'd rather, and they have a little trouble with that, but it counts. Another ritual piece of clothing is something I wear in services. It's a prayer shawl, and it has a fringe on it and has a prayer on it. And you wear this when the Torah is read, or the books, the scroll of Moses. Other ritual observances are kashrut or kosher, where the Bible says, okay, to Jews, you can't eat this, you can't eat that. There's certain rules about what can be eaten and why. And in the United States, you will see something as kosher, it will be marked, like right here. There's a little kosher symbol right there, and it says circle K D, meaning this is kosher dairy. In a lot of countries, there is no kosher mark, but and the Muslims have a similar thing called halal. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar. Okay, another ritual observance would be modesty or purity laws that many women observe, especially married women, and it relates to the menstrual cycle and when women can conceive. There is, if you go to visit a Jewish home, very often you'll see in the doorpost up in the upper right, there'll be a little box, and that inside that box will be a certain prayer from the Bible, and it's called a mezuzah. And then, as Councilmember Noecker mentioned earlier, there is a Jewish ritual around charity, and she used the word tzedakah, which means justice. So that's the justice is the actual word for charity. Okay, another part of Jewish ritual observances are the holidays, the Jewish holidays. Jewish holidays are built around the Hebrew calendar. The Hebrew calendar is built on a lunar cycle. So each new moon is a new Jewish month. Now, originally Jews were an agricultural people, and they had to be careful that planting was done in the springtime and harvesting was done in the fall. So the lunar calendar gets things goofed up in terms of the solar, the Earth going around the sun. So they add a leap year, but the way Jewish calendars do that is by adding a whole month every once in a while instead of a day every 4 years. So it's a little complicated, but it worked out. All right, so I'm going to run through a list of holidays here. Many of you have heard of them. The high holidays are Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year or the new year. And then another one is called Yom Kippur, a Day of Atonement. And that's a day when Jews fast and they look back at how the year passed and look at the mistakes they made, the sins they did, and they look forward, hoping not to do them in the future. And Jews will fast for that 24-hour period in a similar fashion, actually, to Ramadan. There's another holiday that's a harvest holiday called Sukkah, or Sukkos in Ashkenaz in Yiddish. And very often you'll see Jewish homes with little booths or huts in the backyard representing a harvest hut, and it's up in the fall. Then there's a holiday called Hanukkah, and Hanukkah is not a biblical holiday. It's become more important now that we live in America because all the Christian kids next door get Christmas, and all the Jewish kids wonder why can't we get presents. So Hanukkah has been upgraded, especially here in America, and because it comes around Christmas time, and it celebrates a historical event that happened, not a biblical event that happened back in the Greek times. There's another holiday called Purim, also not a biblical holiday, and the book of Esther is a separate book for the Jews, In the Christian Old Testament, the book of Esther is there, but not in the Jewish. And it relates to an event that happened in ancient Persia, where the Jews were saved through luck and divine intervention. Although God is not mentioned once in the book of Esther. The most important, probably, of the holidays for Jewish identity is Passover. And Passover is interesting because it's a home holiday. People do it at home. They don't do it so much in the synagogue. And it celebrates a founding event in Jewish identity. It's the Exodus from Egypt, when the Jewish people came out of slavery of Egypt, led by Moses and his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam. They went through the desert. They found the 10 Commandments. They began doing sacrifices to God, certain rituals, eventually got to the land of Israel, established the temple. And the Passover is to celebrate that founding event. And it's done every year, and it's done with a script in a book called a Haggadah. A Haggadah. And here's the cover of a Haggadah that the Jewish Community Action here in St. Paul does in the community. It's a community. It's a Seder event, can be shared in the community because it's got a universal story of redemption and freedom from slavery. Another holiday would be Shavuos, celebrating the getting the 10 Commandments, and then a sad one called Tish B'Av, which is the 9th of August, or Av, not of August, of Av, a month around August time. And a number of sad things happen in Jewish history. It's another fast day for people who observe it. A modern secular Jewish holiday that we do with the Jewish war vets is Memorial Day here in America. And every Memorial Day, the Jewish war vets goes to each of the Jewish cemeteries here in St. Paul and reads off the name of every single Jewish American war veteran that's buried there or at Fort Snelling. And then we do some ceremonies. There are also life cycle events that Jews do, beginning with birth and the bris and the naming. A bris is a circumcision. Jewish boys at the age of 8 days are circumcised, and Jewish girls are named the first Sabbath after their birth. There's no circumcision for the girls. No. And there's a celebration around this bris ceremony. At age 13, there's an event called a bar mitzvah. Mitzvah means commandment. It's the rule, one of the rules that God lays out for Jews to do. So if you are a bar mitzvah, it means you are the son of the commandments. You have reached an age of adult responsibility where your job is to start following the rules. You're no longer a kid. And you go through a ceremony in the community, in the synagogue typically, where you demonstrate that you can act as an adult. And the equivalent for a girl is a bat mitzvah. You're the daughter of commandments. The ceremony of bar mitzvah was invented in medieval times, and the ceremony of bat mitzvah was invented in Los Angeles back in the early 20th century by a famous rabbi who had only girls and said, hey, why not? Okay. Another important life cycle ceremony is the wedding. There's a whole set of rituals around a Jewish wedding where the bride and groom are married under a canopy. Another important ritual is over healing. If someone is ill, there are community prayers called Misha Bera that are said in synagogue communally, wishing well for the ill person. And finally, death and mourning. There are very specific Jewish rituals around if a person dies, how they're buried, what you do in mourning in the home and for a specific period of time, and then each year thereafter. Okay, next way of being a Jew has to do with Jewish family names. Jews generally did not have family names, did not have last names until around 1800. And then as the modern era came through, and Jews started getting civil rights, it was needed to have a family name so you could be on the tax rolls and probably on the be drafted for the army. So in Europe, Jews began to get names, and many of these names are identifiably Jewish. Okay, that said, name labels can be misleading, and I'm going to give you some names of Jews I know here in Minnesota. Smith, Johnson, Coleman, Miller, Pappas, and Kennedy. All right, nice Jews, all of them. But if you go to South Carolina, you can meet some of my relatives who are not Jews. And here's their names: Hyman, Weinberg, Jacobs, and Eisman. And they're all my blood relatives. So, you know, we're in America now. You can't always tell by a name. Okay, another marker for Jewish identity is Jewish American culture. And I'm just going to talk about people with Minnesota connections. And a Jewish entertainer that's identifiably Jewish and has an impact in American culture is a fellow named Robert Zimmerman from up in northern Minnesota. Many people call him by his stage name Bob Dylan. His mom lived her last days at 740 River Drive in Highland Park. There's a number of Jewish writers that were from St. Paul. It's a generation that is now gone, but they had an impact on American culture. And I can show you some of their books really quick. There's a fellow named William Hoffman who grew up on the West Side. He wrote for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. And then he had published a number of books. One of them is called Tales of Hoffman. Okay, there was another guy named Norman Katkoff. Name sort of lost, except if you ever saw an old black and white TV show called Dr. Kildare, he wrote most of the scripts. So he wrote a lot of Hollywood stuff, but then he wrote a number of books about growing up Jewish in St. Paul. This is one of them called Eagle at My Eyes. There's another fella who was known back in that generation. If you ever saw the old TV show Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, the writer was Max Schulman, and this is a book he wrote about growing up on Selby Avenue in the 1930s. And then finally, the other author I want to mention, St. Paul Jewish author, you can see evidence of him here and there around the city of St. Paul when you run across those Snoopy statues. And that would be Charles Schulz, the originator of Snoopy. Okay. There is a number of historians that we should note here in St. Paul. The late Hy Berman and Linda Schloff wrote this book about the Jews of Minnesota, people of Minnesota. A fellow named the late Gene Rosenblum wrote about the West Side Jewish community and Jewish pioneers of St. Paul. A state representative, now deceased, Bob Latz, his son is a state senator, wrote this book about Jews in Minnesota politics. There are two rabbis that had international reputation that were in St. Paul. One is deceased. He's Gunther Plaut. Wrote this book. He was at Mount Zion for a couple of decades. And the other is still with us. And that's Rabbi Manis Friedman at Adath Yisrael, very well known around the world, and has done a number of video things. Okay, there are a number of klezmer bands as were mentioned earlier. Klezmer is a Jewish folk music. It's not a liturgical music. There is plenty of Jewish liturgical music, but there's a Jewish folk venue called klezmer. It's influenced by gypsy music, of all things, in Europe. And then there's a Ladino version. Also, there's a Ladino Spanish Jewish music. Okay, jumping ahead. Another way of being a Jew is the so-called Jewish race. And I want to say right up front, race has no basis in science. It is not a scientific label. It is a political construct that's used to seek domination one people over another. That said, the notion of a Jewish race has been used to identify Jews and in not very good ways. It was originally established by the Spanish in the 13 and 1400s because they didn't trust Jewish converts to Catholicism. They said, hey, if you don't have purity of blood, you are not a real Spaniard. This came back in terrible ways in last century by the Nazi racial theories who insisted that Jews were a race and that Aryans were a more pure race, and they had to get rid through genocide of one race in order to have dominance of another. So it's a label of Jewish that is unfortunately a negative one. Then further down on the line here is anti-Semitism as a way of deciding who is a Jew and who is not a Jew. And it's a label that's imposed again from the outside. It is not something that Jews want to take on, but it is laid on them. And it was very much active in Europe. We still see it today popping up here and there. In many ways, Jews found out when they came to America, they could walk away from being Jewish in America in a way they could not do it in Europe. So just to give an example of this, when I was born in 1947, there were 5.5 million Jews in the United States when we had a population of 140 million people. Today, the US population is 330 million people, and there are 5.5 million Jews in the United States. What happened to the rest? Well, the answer is they became white and walked away. And that's something that could be done here in the United States to escape the notion of anti-Semitism. All right, there's another way. This is the 9th way of identity. Now that's relatively new since 1948, is there are a number of Jews whose primary identity as a Jew is based on the establishment of the state of Israel. I'm a Jew because I am an Israeli citizen. I'm a Jew because Israel makes me a Jew, and that's their identity. And then finally, the 10th way of being a Jew is a Jew by choice. There are a number of people, more and more these days, that are choosing to be a Jew for their own personal reasons, family reasons, and religious reasons. And I'll give you some examples. One would be my wife. Thank you, Sandy. She did that 15 years into our marriage. It's not something I asked her to do. It's something she wanted to do. The most famous Jew by choice is in the Bible, a person named Ruth. And there's a whole book of Ruth. And she, even though she is a convert, the Jewish religion counts her as very, very important because her descendant was King David, the most important king of the Jewish kingdoms. And from her descendant will come the Jewish Messiah at the time the Messiah comes. And this is from a person who is a convert. So Judaism accepts people coming in. So when did Jews come to St. Paul, and where did they come from? There were several different waves. First of all, there weren't very many. There never was more than 10,000 at the most Jews in St. Paul population at any one time. So we're talking a minority of people here. But we came in waves. From the 1840s to 1880s, essentially there were a few of these Sephardi Jews. These were Jews of Spanish and Portuguese origin that came to St. Paul. And if you go up to the cemetery in the Mount Zion Cemetery up on Larpenteur Avenue, you will see names like Cardozo and De Leon. And these were Sephardi Jews originally from South Carolina. But most of the Jews that came in that period were from Germany or said they were from Germany. So there are a few Poles that came in and said they were Germans. But their marker that you can see today in St. Paul is Mount Zion Temple. Mount Zion Temple on Summit Avenue was originally established in 1857, the year before Minnesota became a state. All right, after in the 1880s to 1924, the largest wave of Jews came in from Eastern and Central Europe. These were Yiddish-speaking Jews. And they were part of a wave of 2 million Jews that came to the United States during that period. In 1924, a wave of America First and nationalism, American nationalism, cut off a large amount of immigration, and that was that. The marker you will see for this wave of Jews in St. Paul is now Temple of Aaron. After World War II, Temple of Aaron is up in Highland Park. After World War II, you had people like me coming in, the baby boomers that came in from other parts of the United States. Sometimes we had different ways of looking at things, and so we founded congregations like Shir Tikva or Emet, the Congregation of Humanistic Judaism. And then also came in the ultra-Orthodox who established Adath Israel up on Fairview Avenue. Later on in the 20th century came Russian Jews from the Soviet Union. So a whole Russian Jewish community came and established here in St. Paul. And then, as I mentioned, another wave is of the converts. A number of people, the local St. Paulites, not raised Jewish, have joined the Jewish community in the past couple of decades, something that didn't happen too much previously. All right, I'm jumping subjects here to Jewish food, since everybody did their homework and got a hold of a bagel, right? So what makes a Jewish food Jewish? There's a couple of different streams here. One is we're going back to those laws that were in the Bible of kashrut, things it needs to be kosher. All right, so that says no pigs, can't do pigs, can't do shellfish. It just says right there. We're similar to the Muslims on the pigs. I think Muslims can eat shellfish. When Jews settled in particular areas, they took their biblical laws about what you can and can't eat, and they attached it to the foodstuffs of the places they were living. So a lot of these Jewish foods come from other places where they settled. That would be Europe. And then with attached Jewish traditions. So a number of foods are related to holidays. So on the Sabbath, you will have on the Sabbath table challah, which is a braided bread. That's eaten just only on Sabbath pretty much. And then you'll have a thing called cholent, which is a stew. Now on the Sabbath, as we mentioned, you can't do any work. So you would put the stew on the stove before the Sabbath, let it cook, and it would stay warm all through the Sabbath, and you'd eat a bit of it during the time, and it's called cholent. And then there's another Jewish food called gefilte fish, which is a chopped white fish, and it's sort of like a Jewish lutefisk. You either like it or you don't like it. Okay. There's a Jewish food that many of you may have run across during Passover. You cannot eat bread that's been leavened, so you eat matzah. It's just like a Ritz. No, it's like anyway. It's a cracker, and it can't anyway. There's a whole long story. You can ask questions later. Hanukkah, the food there is potato pancakes. In Yiddish, you'd say latkes. Okay, why latkes? Because there's a lot of oil in them, and the oil reminds you of all the lights being lit in the candles. All right. And then in Purim, there's a special cookie called a hamantashen that's made. Then Jewish foods for any time. Of course, the main one is lox, bagels, and cream cheese. Okay, and each of these has a kosher symbol on it. Right there, it says kosher, parv, meaning it's neither milk nor meat. And if you go to Cecil's, you can get chopped liver on rye. Because Jews are now living in the land of Israel, they have adopted food from there. And one of the main foods that I eat when I go to Israel is hummus, which has now become a Jewish food in Israel. And you can get it here in Minnesota. And here's an example of it. And it's got to be Jewish. It says Holy Land on it. And it says gluten-free, and it says vegan, and it says halal, but it doesn't say kosher. All right, so it's a Palestinian shop. But, let me tell you, they make the best hummus in Minnesota. So good. And then here is another American kosher food. All right, Hebrew National. Can't get any more kosher than that, right? And where's the symbol? All right, it's there, folks. I won't find it, but there's a hechsher. There's a kosher symbol on it. And then finally, one of the most Jewish American foods that you can find right here. All right, what are we talking about here? Right there is the kosher symbol. So, yes, folks, Cheerios from General Mills is a Jewish food. All right, next, some other Jewish institutions in St. Paul. On the east side, we have Jewish cemeteries, specifically Jewish cemeteries. There's a thing called a mikveh, which is a special ritual bath. There is the Jewish Community Center, which is open to anybody. There are a couple of Jewish parochial schools. There's Jewish Family Service, which is provide services to anybody. There is Shalom Home on out West 7th Street, and you don't have to be Jewish to live in that and to go there. There is the Minnesota Jewish Theater and Highland Library. West Side Neighborhood House started as a project by the Mount Zion Women's Auxiliary for Jewish immigrants. There's no Jewish immigrants over there anymore, so it's open for anybody. There is Jewish Community Action, which doesn't have a building, but they do social action work here in St. Paul, and Ramon Jewish Arts Council, which does Jewish events. I want to point out the Jewish World newspaper, and they publish a directory, and they have an online directory, and the online directory is excellent for finding Jewish resources in St. Paul. And then we have a very unusual Jewish institution, something called Regions Hospital. What? All right, let's dig this out a little bit, but I see Mayor Carter is here, so I'm going to let him come on in. Maybe? All right, just tell me, let me know. All right, Regions Hospital. Originally, before it was called Regions, it was called St. Paul Ramsey Hospital. Before it was St. Paul Ramsey Hospital, it was Anchor Hospital. Anchor Hospital was named after Arthur Anchor when he died in 1923. Anchor Hospital used to be out West 7th Street on Colburn Avenue. Who was Arthur Anchor? He was a Jew who came to St. Paul, Minnesota in the early 1880s and built up City County Hospital to be the 8th largest public hospital in the United States. And it was called City County until his death, and then renamed Anchor Hospital after him. Arthur Anchor was the grandson of a German Jewish immigrant and the son of a Jewish woman who was a four-generation Sephardi Jew from the East Coast. Arthur Anchor came to St. Paul, married a non-Jewish woman, never told anybody he was Jewish, never went to synagogue, and is not buried in a Jewish cemetery, but he established the premier medical institution in the city of St. Paul, also part of Jewish heritage. I used to have 2 Jewish jokes, but one was already told. So I can only tell one Jewish joke. And it has the same theme as Councilmember Noecker said. It is the tension between a Jew seeking God and questioning God. So Moshe is driving in Jerusalem. He's very late for an important meeting, looking for a parking place, but he can't find one. In desperation, he turns his face upwards and says, "Lord, if you find me a parking place, I promise I'll only eat kosher and respect Shabbos, the Sabbath, and all the holidays." Miraculously, a space opens up just in front of him. Moshe turns his face back to heaven and says, "Never mind, I just found one." Okay, so we have 2 minutes left here to learn the entire Yiddish language. So Yiddish is a mix of Germanic language and Hebrew words, and I'm going to throw them at you really quick. Shalom Aleichem literally means peace be with you. It means hi, how you doing? It's very similar to the Arabic Salam Aleikum. Mazel Tov literally means star good, or lucky star, or good fortune, or congratulations. Mazel Tov. L'chaim, all right, in Minnesota that would be skull. It means literally to life. All right, here's a phrase that's very useful. Mit ein Tuchas tanzt man nicht auf zwei Chasanas. And it means with one behind, you can only dance, you can't dance at two weddings. And translated to English is, which side are you on? And I will give you the Yiddish expression way of saying what Councilmember Noecker said earlier, men tacht and Gott lacht. It rhymes in Yiddish. Men, one plans, but God laughs. And when you say goodbye, you will say, sei gesund, be well. I'm going to just introduce you to one other Yiddish phrase because I'm running over time here. There's a concept called a Shabbos Goy. Shabbos Goy. Shabbos is the Yiddish way of saying Sabbath, and Goy is the Yiddish way of saying non-Jew. And I used to live on the West Side also, and I ran across a number of Mexican-American guys who were one generation older than me. And they told me when they were kids that they were Shabbos Goys. And their job was, when they were a kid, to go into their Jewish neighbor's home in the middle of winter without being asked, to walk right into the door and go right over to the stove or the oven and stoke the fire, to throw a few more logs on or to put more coal in the fire, and then to go home. And what was going on here? Because it was the Sabbath, Jews were prohibited from doing work. These were religious Jews. They were prohibited from doing work. And their non-Jewish neighbors next door told their kids, listen, you have to go on the Sabbath and make sure the fire's still going, because they're not allowed to do that. And don't ask for any money because it's the Sabbath. Just do it. And so these guys would go and do it. And maybe they got a nickel later in the week, but they were not allowed to be asked to do this. And that's a Shabbos Goy, and that was their job. Some famous Shabbos Goys that you may have heard of is an Irish actor named Jimmy Cagney, who spoke good Yiddish. Mayor Colin Powell also was a Shabbos Goy who spoke Yiddish. And in Minnesota here, Minnesota Governor and later Senator Floyd B. Olson, who grew up on the Minneapolis North Side, was also a Yiddish speaker. And I want to go ahead.
I just wanted to let you know we have 10 minutes left, and so
right.
If people have any questions, please do chat them to me, and I will I'll read them out loud. And it says the mayor is unmuted. We will leave it for now. So if the mayor is able to speak at this time, I'm not sure he's still on, but we'll give him one more chance.
I am still on, Deb. Can you hear me this time?
Yay! Yes! Hooray!
Oh, well, fantastic. I appreciate it, Neal. Thank you very much for that this history lesson. This is very, very interesting, and I'm learning a lot of history. I did not know that I could see a kosher mark on groceries when I go to the grocery store, among a number of other things that I'm learning as a result of this call. Hey, listen, thank you all. I appreciate you logging in, and I appreciate you being a part of this conversation. We all know that we'd rather do this personally, but I do appreciate the opportunity to join for Jewish Heritage Month, this virtual celebration. We find ourselves physically distant, but it's important now more than ever that we stay socially connected to each other, so that we can make sure that we're taking care of ourselves and taking care of each other through all of these unprecedented challenges. So I just want to thank all of you on Team St. Paul for your continued dedication, to your commitment to serving our community, through the flexibility and just tenacity that you've shown, in particular over the last couple of months, as we have thought and rethought and had to restructure and find new ways to approach these challenges. One of the things that's very critical, of course, as we stay connected to one another, is just thinking about how to celebrate and connect with all of the people in our communities of many faiths and cultural backgrounds to support our diverse and thriving city. These things are important for us, especially as we all face what lies ahead, especially as we're going to have to get our messages out specifically in community to continue to focus on the messages we're hearing from public safety and from our public health folks that we're going to have to continue to cultivate resiliency. We're going to have to continue to find our hope and courage together, and continue to just build our city is a way that works for all of us. The contributions of those people in our Jewish community offer us these very values and aspirations through this rich history and culture that we're hearing about right now, demonstrating a will, that determination and courage to overcome an incredible amount of challenges throughout the course of human history. It's that kind of determination, that we're going to need as we push to continue to cultivate and nurture all of us, and as a city workforce, as we continue to cultivate and nurture our community, our city, our neighbors, and our businesses. Now, there's no greater time than right now to find just a hope through our connections to each other. And so today I just offer my gratitude to all you joining for this celebration, and ask that you join me in thanking and supporting all of the volunteers who put this all together. Thank you guys for your great work. Thank you again, Neal, for the presentation, and thank you all as we celebrate our first responders, our nurses, our doctors, just all of those who are on the front line helping us to navigate this crisis. I look forward to reopening all the doors and welcoming everybody in person. I appreciate the kind introduction, albeit quite a while ago, Councilmember Noecker, and mazel tov to all of you. Thank you much.
I don't have any questions so far.
Okay, I got a little bit of a Yiddish lesson here. Okay, a couple of Yiddish words. All right, a shlemiel. A shlemiel is a bungler. A shlemazel. A shlemazel is a born loser. So to give you an example, a shlemiel spills the soup he's carrying in the cafeteria. The shlemazel is who the soup spills on. Okay. A Yiddish expression that many of you have probably heard is oy vey, oy vey, oy vey. Okay, vey is the word for pain. Oy means oy. So oy vey. There's another very useful Yiddish word called nu. Nu? Huh? Well, me? What? Nu? Okay. There's a word that we use to introduce this program, which is nosh. And I had a prop, but I lost it. Here it is. A nosh. Okay. A nosh is a little bite to eat, a little taste. And as you can see, I went pretty quick here, and there was a lot of stuff. And so you're just getting a taste of this. That's a nosh.
Hi, Neal. We do have some questions. And the first one says, Neal said that Jews originally were agricultural people. When did that start to change?
I would say pretty much there's a couple of markers there. First of all, the northern tribes of Israel were conquered by the Assyrians in 586 BCE, something like that. And the elite was carried off into exile. And then later, after exile, they came back to Judea. But Judea began to get more urbanized around the times of the Greeks. And so somewhere in that period, Jews began becoming more of an urban people, and actually started migrating out of Judea to Alexandria, to up into Anatolia, which is now Turkey. They were in Iran, they were in Yemen, they were in Rome, they were in Athens. So people started moving out of the land of Israel, and they had to make their religion more portable and less agricultural.
Hi, Neal. This is a great question. It says, does anyone still speak Yiddish?
Absolutely. In 1939, about 10 million of the 16 million Jews in the world were Yiddish speakers at that point. 6 million of them were killed by the Nazis, and others assimilated. My father grew up in a Yiddish-speaking household and refused to speak it, and so I never learned it. I had to learn it later. My father wanted to be an American, and so he untaught himself the language. Today, there's a couple 100,000 people who speak it, mainly ultra-Orthodox Jews, and then there's a young cultural group of people who are doing klezmer music and literature and others. So it's still being spoken by a younger crowd. In Minneapolis, once a month, there's a group called the Yiddish Winkel, Winkel meaning corner, that meets to do Yiddish programming over at the Sabas JCC in St. Louis Park. In New York, there's a very active Yiddish community, and there are Yiddish clubs in various places around the country, and Yiddish is being taught in about a dozen universities around the world. And it's used a little bit in Israel. It was suppressed in Israel because the Israelis wanted to make Hebrew the predominant language.
So I'm going to make one comment from another city council member and then ask a final question. Councilmember Prince says, Governor Mario Cuomo, father of the current governor, was also a Shabbos goy. Thanks, okay, Neal, for this wonderful presentation. And let's see. It says, what resources, books, articles, authors would you recommend if people want to learn more about modern anti-Semitism?
Modern anti-Semitism. You know what? I'm going to give you a cheater's answer. I would start looking online at a Jewish newspaper called The Forward, F-O-R-W-A-R-D. It originally was published in Yiddish in the United States, and it's still published in Yiddish online, but it's published in English. And theforward.com is a really good place to start to look at modern anti-Semitism, because almost every week there is an article about some incident and what people are doing about it, and then references to further study on this. So, and it's a readily available resource. You just go on the internet, forward.com, and if you want, you can subscribe, but you can also see it without a subscription. So I would start there because there are whole shelves worth of materials and all kinds of articles, but I would start with the Forward.
This is Deb Calvert, and I would recommend a book that we were actually going to do for a book study as part of Jewish Heritage Month called Anti-Semitism Here and Now by Deborah Lipstadt, that was published in February of 2019 and is very prescient and sort of saw some of what is happening currently in the world as it was developing. So I think that's also a great read for people to familiarize themselves. I would just like to thank our wonderful mayor, Councilmember Noecker, my fellow committee members, the Office of Technology and Communication, and our presenter, Neal Gosman, for their heroic efforts in getting an online event off the ground. I just think it is more important than ever under the current circumstances to make connection and build community and break down barriers and create understanding. And I hope we were able to do that a little bit today. So thank you everybody for joining.